Welcome to PPI Conversations, an opportunity to connect with leading-edge thinkers and leaders and discuss today's pressing topics in the engineering and construction industry. With your host, PPI Executive Director Gary Fischer. We at PPI address the root cause of major capital project cost and schedule overruns through the research and dissemination of project production management and its foundation of operations science. Enjoy the conversation.
Well, welcome. I'm Gary Fischer, Executive Director here at the Project Production Institute. Thanks for joining us in what we believe you'll find a very interesting and helpful new feature here at the Institute. We're calling it PPI Conversations. We're seeking out industry leading edge thinkers and we'll be sharing their experiences and thoughts with our listeners. I'm really pleased to be here today with James Choo, who is the Chief Technical Officer for Strategic Project Solutions. He also plays a vital role on the PPI Technical Committee. I've come to learn that James has a really unique and interesting history with the emergence of Last Planner and all the developments since then. He's really uniquely qualified to answer a question we seem to get all the time. What's the difference between Last Planner and project production control? So let's get right to it. James, welcome to the first of what we think will be many important conversations here at PPI. Let's start with a bit of your background. Now let's share with your audience how you got to this place in your career.
So when I actually look at my career, I like to think that I'm actually right in the middle, like the midpoint of my career, where I actually have spent some time doing things. And I actually have some time left to actually do things that I haven't done yet. So actually going back at thinking about how it got, I got to where I got to, I would say it's purely by meeting the right people at the right time who provided the adequate guidance to point me to seek the answers to some of the questions I had at that point in time. So I started actually as a civil engineer. And then while actually studying the civil engineering, one of the biggest things that was actually coming to forth at that point was about quality. And I was actually very interested in air quality. So that's what I actually got into. And developed the simulation engine at the same time practice to do air quality simulation for highway tunnels. I think that's the first time I actually got introduced to the concept of control, because maintaining air quality to a certain level to keep the passengers safe is the effective result of the control system that you actually implement. After that, somehow I got interested in construction engineering and management, because that's what the biggest thing at that point actually time was. So I came to Berkeley to study construction engineering and management. One of the first courses that I took introduced the concept of PERT. Now, PERT may not be a common terminology amongst a lot of project professionals, but I'm sure the terminology P5, P10, P50, P90, P95 is a very, very familiar concept.
Yes, it is.
And when we first learned it, I got to actually simulate the result of a project schedule. And then I actually had a very interesting question, which was, if I'm a project manager and someone told me that my schedule was P80, which is pretty high to what typically people use, can I sleep knowing that 20% of the time I'm going to actually fail? If I was told that by actually spending 10% more money and 10% more, let's say, duration, I am now actually at 82.5% certainty, is that going to help me sleep better? So at which point can a project manager have the confidence that they can actually deliver a project? So with that question, I actually had a discussion with Iris Tomline, who's a professor at UC Berkeley and one of the founders of the Lean Construction Institute. She said, we might be working on something that you might be interested in, and got introduced to lean construction. And then she subsequently introduced me to Glenn Ballard, who many of you know as the father of Last Planner, along with the late Greg Howell.
Mhm.
And then she also introduced me to someone that was actually very interesting. She said, there is a contractor in San Francisco you need to go meet. He's been actually implementing these ideas in his company. And that was Todd Zabel, who's the president and founder of SPS. And we met, and since then we've been actually collaborating before even the founding of SPS. And as you can see, the rest is history.
Oh, that's really interesting background. So you have a very unique role in the development of Last Planner. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so what's actually interesting is I actually had the opportunity to be involved from the very early days of Last Planner to what it is now. Now, it's actually very interesting because Last Planner, when it was actually first started, wasn't what it is now. So if you actually look at the latest title of the benchmark, it's actually called 2020 Current Process Benchmark for the Last Planner System of Project Planning and Control. Okay. Now, one thing that's actually been interesting is to actually watch it go from a form of production control to increase the workflow reliability on a site, to enable crew to do what they're supposed to do, to now actually is an alternative way to plan and control a project. While doing that, I actually was involved in, I said, the first ever software development of Last Planner in '97. And at the same time, having implemented the solutions and actually knowing what works and what doesn't work, at the same time, what's implementable and what's actually not implementable. So you can say I actually have practical and academic knowledge throughout the years of the development of Last Planner.
Wow. So you've really seen it all through its whole life and as it exists today. Yeah. So when I'm hearing a Last Planner was really the first attempt at creating effective production control for a capital project. That's right?
Yeah, I believe before that, a lot of the emphasis in academic and industry was about project controls. Okay.
So hold up. So production control and project controls. What's the difference between those two?
Now, one thing that we do actually have to say is we actually have to put a qualifier. So production control is a concept that existed long before Last Planner or the concept of project production control. Because the project control actually comes from the more of the manufacturing industry. So actually, before this discussion, I actually happened to I looked up the definition of production control, and it's actually American Production Inventory Control Society, APIX, in 1959.
Wow.
Said the production control is the task of predicting, planning, and scheduling work, taking into account manpower, material availability, and other capacity restrictions, and cost so as to achieve a proper quality and quantity at the time it is needed, and then following up the schedule to see that the plan is carried out using whatever system have proven satisfactory for the purpose. Okay. So when we're talking about production control, we need to make sure that we understand that it's not a concept that was actually developed for construction or project, but it's a concept that was actually adopted from under the industry, mainly the manufacturing industry, right? So we can actually talk about the difference between the Last Planner and the project production control, not necessarily just the wider production control. Now, one of the other things that I actually seen, that actually are some quotes you think, oh, it's pretty good. And then you actually, after year and after year after year, you actually start to understand the deeper and deeper meaning of it, right? So here's another quote that I like to read that this is one of my favorite quotes, and it's actually by Peter Drucker. And in his 2008 book, Management, he says, in the dictionary of social institutions, the word controls It's not the plural of word control. Not only do more control, not necessarily give you more control, give more control, but the two words have different meanings altogether. The synonyms for the controls are measurements and information. The synonyms for control is direction. Controls are analytical, concerned with what was and is. Control is normative and concerned with what ought to be. Okay. Now, so a lot of people actually just say, project controls, production project controls, and even when they actually talk about production control, project production control, what a lot of people have in mind is the actual project controls, right?
Yeah.
But the actual concept of a project control, project production control is the triggering action. I think is the key differentiation. Rather than is it measuring progress and forecasting, predicting what the outcome is going to be, is it actually triggering an action? And I think that's the main difference to the project production control.
So let me dive in a little bit on the, if you will, the time horizon for production control and project controls. In my experience, project controls is looking back to where the project has been with information that could be several months old. Does that match your own experience?
Even if the project data is, let's say, fairly recent or actually real time, that does not make it production control. Right?
So what does make it production? What is that production control we're talking about? Bring that to life on a capital project for us.
Right. So the question is, number one, what is actually controlling against is one thing that we need to think about. So number one, are we trying to measure what we did against the baseline schedule and then forecast where things might actually end up? That basis of the baseline schedule or baseline cost is the role of project controls.
Yeah.
Right? Production control is guiding the action against the production system design. Okay. So when you're talking about production system design, you're specifically talking about production system design policies.
Yeah.
Production policies, such as amount of WIP in the system, the reorder quantity, reorder point, batch size. All these are different elements that actually set the foundation of what you're controlling against.
Yeah.
Okay. So the actual definition of the roles of the two things are very, very different.
Yeah, that's very well put.
Yeah.
Totally different basis for one versus the other. And it strikes me that production control allows far more actionable things to be taken in real time versus that lag that almost invariably exists with project controls, that you're able to actually see what production is happening like today and make adjustments to get production at the rates that you need to have it to satisfy your objectives. Is that accurate?
Yes. So if we can actually talk about one more thing, one of the most popularized in the lean industries for a form of production control is concept of pull. A lot of people actually talk about pull, right? Or a lot of people actually refer to that actually as just in time. Now, pull actually is a production control protocol that actually says, if I actually receive a signal to do something, I either make something or I deliver something. That signal is telling me to take an action.
Yeah.
It actually isn't concerned is what I done 5 minutes ago. it's not concerned is where this actually product is going to end up. It's concerned is whether I should work or not work, whether I should deliver or not deliver.
Yeah.
So if we actually had the most accurate, up-to-date information as to what the current situation is, that is focused on the measurement, not providing a normative or a trigger for action.
Mhm.
Okay. So the question is, even when we're actually doing, so a lot of people actually do daily meetings in construction, right?
Yeah.
If the daily meeting is spent on talking about what got done, how much concrete was placed,
Mhm.
how much rebar was installed, that is form of a project controls.
Mhm.
If you're actually going to say, with the capacity that we have of the labor and equipment and space that we actually have on site, here's what we're going to actually do today. If we actually make that decision, or we're going to actually do it tomorrow,
Mhm.
this is what should be done, and this is what will be done tomorrow. That is actually a production control.
Got it.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Now, one of the things that you do need to actually know is, in order to trigger what needs to be done, you actually have to know what was done.
Yeah, you do.
Right? Yeah. And then at the same time, you need to actually know what should be done.
Yep.
So those are the elements that actually govern the production control. But it's actually it's actually different. The main difference is it actually triggering something, a response or an action, for the capacity to do something or not do something, versus is it just tracking what was done, versus and then forecasting based on that.
Yeah, and I guess you're really in real time,
Right.
not in several months of lag time, because some people
Exactly.
with project controls, oh, we take action.
Right.
We think we're off track, so we're going to add people or work more hours or whatever, but that's with this huge lag time in the system that is less effective.
Right. So based on that definition, you can probably see that just doing more detailed project controls does not make it a production control.
Yeah.
Right. We actually seen companies actually say we're going to actually adopt production control and go down to level 4, level 5, level 6, level 7 schedule.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, it's the same project controls.
Same concept,
Yeah.
replicated in more detail.
Yeah.
Which doesn't get you different results. So
Right.
let's back up to the last planner for when it was created, because you were on the ground floor of creating it. Over time, what did you find missing from last planner? It was a good start, but how does it compare to what's needed for effective production control?
Well, I think there are two elements that actually come to light. One actually is in the last planner system, it actually has a specific, last planner actually at the end of the day is a specific configuration of project production control.
Right.
It actually has specific elements, which is, it originally was just actually weekly work plans, but now it actually has project execution planning, master scheduling, phase scheduling, look ahead, weekly work plans, and then learning. So it actually has, at the end of the day, the whole gamut of project planning and control, which replaces the current way of doing project production and control. Now, one of the things that we actually saw is, in the early days, I don't know whether this is intentional or this is something that just actually happened along the way of development. The last planner initially actually talked about production control. Now the name actually is project planning and control. Now, one of the things that we started to see as we actually got more and more involved in the actual science of production is what really determines the effective performance of a production system is the concept of web control and management of variability. And the role the production system actually designed has on the implication of how you actually control that production system. And we actually started to see that gap in the last planner system as it's currently defined.
Yeah.
At the same time as it is actually being implemented. There are many, many implementations of last planner that we're actually seeing that is, at the end of the day, using pool planning, or more accurately put, collaborative mapping to produce a critical path schedule. Which I don't know where it actually fits in the hierarchy of the last planner system as it's designed now, nor it was actually intended at the beginning. So there was two things. Conceptually, there was a gap, and then practically, there was actually a gap.
So what I'm hearing, James, is that last planner, while it was conceived to be production control relative to the project production system, has evolved into something that is now connected to the schedule as its basis instead. Brings us back right to the other conversation of, well, that's project controls, which has been seen to be multiple, lots of times over, not very effective in helping you actually control the work. So is that how it's evolved?
Well, I wouldn't actually say it's purely project controls, but I would actually say it is actually missing, as you said, what is it missing? It's actually missing some of the fundamental operations science, which actually govern how a production system design behaves in the actual methodology of last plan.
So let's just be really clear and simple here for our audience. What would you consider the primary elements, just 1 through 5 or whatever they are, of effective project production control? What does it look like for effective production control?
So for the effective production control, number one, you actually need to know, you actually need to have a target that allows you to actually deliver the outcome that you're looking for. Specifically speaking, from a production perspective, you actually need what the throughput you're actually aiming for actually is, what the demand actually is.
So a production target.
Exactly.
Right.
It's not a milestone, but it's a rate in which you're going to actually produce something.
So the analog for that of what I saw at an automobile factory was 1 vehicle per minute coming off of that line. That's what you're talking about.
Right. Number two, you need to actually understand what your process actually is. Not the schedule, not the timing, but the process in which you're actually going to do the work.
So this is the work process, the workflow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And then the third, you need to actually understand what your true capacity of the production system actually is.
So tell me just a little bit more about that. What do you mean by true capacity?
So one thing that's actually interesting is one of the things that I actually learned throughout my career is when we actually talk about capacity in the construction industry, we typically talk about this crew can actually do X amount of concrete per day, or this crew can actually do X amount of steel per day. Now, when you're actually talking about capacity takes into consideration the mix of what they're making in production. So if you're actually doing, as you probably actually know from the practical experience, the linear feet of pipe that people can actually install differs if they're actually working on a single size pipe versus 2 different sizes of pipe or 10 different sizes of pipe. So the capacity is not a void actually of what they're making. So to understand true production, true capacity, you need to understand the relationship between the capacity and the product that you're actually making. Okay.
Makes sense?
Yep. And then the next one that you need to understand is the actual concept of inventory. When we actually say inventory, there are things that you're making, or you're delivering, you're installing. Well, let's not forget you're designing. Those are all the activities that you're performing. So the work in process is something that you need to understand.
Mhm.
At the same time, all these things are actually supported by things that you purchase,
Right.
the stocks and inventory.
So having the right level of inventory, whatever that is, for the work process is a critical element of production control, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you actually don't know, and then being able to control to it.
Mm,
Okay. So again, if you're actually, let's say WIP target is 10, and if someone actually wants to start 11th into the system, the production control should prevent you actually from doing so.
right.
If the WIP level gets to 9, then it should trigger for it to actually happen.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. So it's active control of inventory.
Yep.
Okay.
And then last but not least, actually controlling and minimizing variability.
So how do you control variability? That stuff happens, you know?
Right. Well, there are two things. So if you actually look at it as so there are uncertainties, okay,
Mhm.
and there are variabilities that we do actually have our control because we actually design these variability into our system.
Tell me
So
more.
so two things that we actually want to talk about. One is the variability that's actually born out of the product design. So for example, let's actually talk about housing, planned development housing. Now, it would be very boring if you actually walked into a neighborhood where all the houses look exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right? So you actually are going to have 4 or 5, 6, or 10 different variations of the house.
Okay.
That is the variability that you're introducing into your production by design.
Got it.
So that's a product-based variability.
Right.
Now, there is the actual, because of that, the amount of time it takes you to do the foundation, the amount of time it takes you to do the structure is going to be different. Okay. So that's actually a process variability that's generated out of the product.
Yep.
At the same time, there is a variability that's introduced by how people release work into the system. What we mean by that is this. Are we going to start 10 houses simultaneously?
Yeah.
That actually puts a big burden on the first trade,
Mm-hmm.
which now actually puts a bigger burden on the second trade. And the first trade at that point in time may have nothing to do for a while. Or are we going to be introducing 2 houses at a time?
Yeah.
And 3 houses at a time, or maybe 1 house at a time, right? These are the variability that's created by how the work is introduced into the system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of the fundamental things that we believe in our industry is any work done is good. Any progress made is good.
Absolutely.
So the more you can actually push into the system, the better we actually believe it actually is.
Yep. That's the way I grew up.
Yeah. And therefore, that can be the cause of variability. So when we talk about actually controlling variability or actually minimizing variability, is being unable to understand the effect of those decisions.
Yeah.
And then minimizing those actually negative implications by getting a better handle on what decisions we actually made.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty. So 6 items there.
Yeah. So if you actually start to think about these things, right? So demand, as well as the 5 levels of production, which we call product design, process design, capacity, inventory, and variability. I don't think there actually is that discussion in the current concept of loss planner, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's why I think where the a little bit of divide between the actual project production control and loss planner is. Again, loss planner it actually is its own attempt to actually implement production control as it's actually designed.
Right.
However, it's actually still void of these operation science fundamentals in its guiding principles.
Sounds like a really critical differentiation.
Yeah.
Well, that I think that helps us understand the difference between the two and answers that key question of what's the difference between last planner and production control, project production control. So let's take a peek over the horizon a little bit. You know, that's kind of the state of the art with production control. You've learned a lot about what makes effective project production control to this point in your career. Look over the horizon. What's in the future for this? Where's it going?
Well, I think we're actually heading into a very, very exciting future. One thing that we're actually starting to see is there's a lot of people starting to talk about digitalization.
Right.
Data. Who owns the data? Where's the data coming from? How do we create data? Was something that wasn't a part of the conversation, especially in our industry, for a very long time.
Yeah.
But now it actually is. So digitalization. And then the other one that we're actually starting to talk about, and people are starting to look at, is automation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, what's actually also interesting is, as part of these two efforts, there's also the ubiquity of these IoT sensors that is now becoming just all over in our construction industry, especially from the manufacturing and the supplier, as well as these heavy equipments that we're actually using.
I hear even hand tools are starting to have embedded sensors.
Exactly. So this ubiquity of the sensors, fueled by all these industry movements, Industry 4.0 and Supply Chain 4.0, is starting to create abundance of data.
Yeah.
And with the digitalization and automation, what we're going to see more and more is this project production control being automated.
Mm.
Now, here's the true kicker. In order for you to automate, you need to understand how a system should respond to any variability or change.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the policies that we actually talked about, production system related policies, become even more critical. Because you're not going to actually have an opportunity for someone with a lot of experience to sit there and make decisions in every question that comes up.
Yeah, those decisions will be automated, is what you're telling me.
And the triggers and the actions.
Interesting.
Right? So, for example, if we actually were thinking about not someone actually picking up the radio and actually say, or walkie-talkie and say, I need you to deliver this. If there was a system that actually looks at the inventory level, pulls the trigger to an automated vehicle, automated loader, and then actually automatically gets delivered, automatically gets offloaded, that policy would actually have to be in place for it to be automated.
Got it.
Which means we would actually have to know exactly how much inventory is on both sides, and at the same time, how much it should be there.
So we could have a concrete sensor that detects if the concrete is ready.
Cured.
Pushing or pulling a signal to a crew to say, okay, come and strip my forms.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah.
That opens up so many possibilities for the future. It's like, wow, That's exciting stuff. Yeah. How close do you think the future is? Are we there? Or we just don't recognize it, or is it just still, it's in its infancy?
I mean, we call that vision intelligent production, and I think it's getting very, very close. And a lot of the pieces are in place for the companies that want to actually take advantage of it. Some people see it as 20, 30 years down the road.
Yeah.
But at that same time, actually have a famous quote that I don't know who came up with it is, people that don't think can be done shouldn't stop the people that are already doing it.
Oh, that's priceless. That's hilarious. What a great quote. I love it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I've seen that a couple of times in my career. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, wow, that's exciting stuff, James. I really appreciate you sharing so freely of your experience and helping us get right down to basics here and laying it out on the differences between Last Planner and project production control. And wow, what an exciting future over the horizon, or it's here now and we just got to recognize it, grab it and use it.
Yeah.
So that was really, really interesting and insightful. And if you're sitting there wondering in the audience saying, man, I really want to learn more about that, please come to join up with the Project Production Institute. Come to our website, join the PPI, There, you're going to find a ton of really good publications on all these topics, including effective project production control. We would point you to, if you're just getting started, get signed up for one of our certification education efforts. We've got one going at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo now, and our second one will be at Texas A&M starting in first quarter of next year. We also have working groups for those of you who really want to roll up your sleeves and help bring leading edge practices into your industry. So we've got one right now, for example, that the energy working group is very active. And if you got an interest in that, please get signed up. We really want good participation in those. So this is the first of what we hope will be many conversations. Really appreciate your feedback on how did this work? What can we do to make it better in the future? Was it effective? Did we communicate our messages clearly? And with that, I ask that you drop me an email if you have a few minutes. We're going to pop up my email address here shortly at the end. So thank you again for your time and attention, and we hope you found it useful.